Initial Thoughts is a spoiler-free movie review series. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome back to Initial Thoughts, a series in which we talk about films as and when they are released. Today's film we're talking about is Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, which is directed by Adam Wingard and stars Rebecca Hall and Brian Tyree Henry. So Godzilla Kong: The New Empire is an interesting beast, no pun intended, because you have a movie here that is actually building on a pretty solid foundation in what Godzilla vs. Kong was in 2021, which was one of the earliest videos I talked about on this channel, which was a movie that I didn't get seen in cinemas for obvious reasons, but I always thought that I found enjoyable, I found mindless fun, and I know we talked about that recently, which you have movies that are mindless fun, but they forget the fun part. And Godzilla vs. Kong, I thought, played into the fun, didn't take itself too seriously, and was an enjoyable time, but not ultimately fantastic. But the interesting spanner in the works for that is what has came out since. And what was released not that long ago was Godzilla Minus One, which is far and away the best monster movie, if you like. In the sense of Kong, Godzilla, any iteration of either character, any combination of the characters, any movie, Godzilla Minus One is far superior to anything I had seen previously, or probably will see for a long time in that regard. So I didn't go into Godzilla Kong: The New Empire going, I hope this is even better than Godzilla Minus One, because it wasn't going to be. Because Godzilla Minus One was so different, and in what it excelled at was its human element, and it built so much. It was a fantastic human story that happened to include Godzilla, that amplified the story to an even stronger standpoint. But it was a really emotional and it was a really connective story with the characters involved. And going back to talking about Godzilla vs. Kong in 2021, and any of these movies for that matter, even back to something like Kong Skull Island, which I enjoyed more than a lot of people seem to have, the human characters have never been the strong point, but to varying degrees. I thought in Kong Skull Island, for example, you had Brie Larson, you had Tom Hiddleston, you had Samuel Jackson, and their characters in it were not the worst. Not unbelievable or not fantastic, but enjoyable and connected to some degree. In Godzilla vs. Kong, the characters were more along the lines of forgettable in the side of the human side of things. And they were just really exposition dumps. They were, this is what happens, and this is why Godzilla has to go to this area, and this is why Kong has to go to this area, and all that kind of, that's what their purpose was, and I mean, that isn't the case. That isn't not the case here in Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. But I have to say, in this movie in particular, I found these human characters that didn't have any major names. I mean, Rebecca Hall and Brian Tyree Henry, who lead the cast, you wouldn't say are household names, but are both decent in their own right. Brian Tyree Henry in particular, after something like Bullet Train, does bring comedic value and does bring that kind of connectivity to a character that you want continue from his role in the previous film, Godzilla vs. Kong. But all that being said, I did go into this with a little bit of optimism. Not to the point where I thought this would be a fantastic movie, a movie of the year contender. No, I'm not silly enough to think that. And I'm not silly enough to think it was ever going to come close to what Godzilla Minus One achieved. But something that was interesting, and obviously the point that kind of is the selling point for this, it was the selling point for the previous movies, is the visuals, the CGI, the capturing of these huge creatures, Godzilla and Kong, and making it somewhat realistic in a sense of these such monstrous creatures being able to destroy cities at a time and it being somewhat believable. So there is that kind of detach your brain a little bit, but also it has to be said, and I think I remember saying this when I talked about Godzilla vs. Kong in 2021, I would have liked to have seen that in a cinema, and I thought that I tried to take my mind away from and watching it at home, so it's not really getting the same feel as if I was in a cinema, and that was why I tried to rate it accordingly if I was in a cinema. This one, I did get to see in a cinema, and I have to say, visually, the effects, the landscapes, the cinematography, that's the strongest point of certainly these last two movies, Godzilla vs. Kong and this movie. And overall, I think going into it, there was a point of, can this make me care? And I suppose that's the point for so many movies, and movies certainly of this nature, that again I use that word, or that term, mindless fun. Because Godzilla vs. Kong and Godzilla Kong and all these movies, apart from Godzilla -1, which is so much more than just mindless fun, in this movie you expect to just... It's a popcorn flick. Isn't that the term that people like to use? You go, mindless, switch off your brain, enjoy a movie for 2 hours, go home, that was it. Forget most of it. Did I get that from Godzilla Kong The New Empire? I thought this was slightly better than the previous one. I thought Godzilla Kong The New Empire it built on what worked in the last movie, and it kind of removed a lot of the things that didn't work from the last movie. And that's something, not often that happens with franchises. Sometimes they're kind of doomed to make the same mistakes over and over again, especially franchises that are mindless. I'm looking at you, Fast and Furious. But when you look at Godzilla and Kong and any movie connected to them, something that people involved sometimes fail to manage, or fail to acknowledge is probably the better term, is all we want to see is these guys, or these big dudes, fighting each other, or fighting something that's even bigger, or that's it. We don't want to see human characters. And when I say we don't want to see human characters, that was something that completely threw me off when it came to Godzilla -1. So I'll try and stop talking about that, and I'll detach that, and let's just talk about this. And for Godzilla Kong, and the last movie, and the movies prior to it, all you want to see is the big CGI monsters fighting each other, and it look somewhat, if you can say realistic, because that's definitely not the right word, but you can get connected to it, and you can kind of care about what's going on, instead of just a mindless fight between creatures and one wins, or whatever. I got a lot of enjoyment out of this movie. And not to the point where I thought this was fantastic, because there's definitely some negatives, and to be honest, the negatives are really that... The biggest negative I found with this movie was kind of the first act. The first act, while it starts quite exciting when it's opening scene, after that, it kind of lulls into this real focus, and you know what I'm going to say, on these pointless human characters that kind of start to... This is how we're getting to this point. This is how we're going to... And obviously, that is to set up what is coming. I just think there's a slight over-reliance on the human characters in this movie. I thought it was even more prevalent in the previous movie. So while I do think that's still a negative here, just for these human characters in particular, Rebecca Hall and Brian Terry Henry, you know, they're fine. They're okay, and they're actually less annoying and less prevalent as they were in Godzilla vs. Kong in 2021. So my negative, I don't want that to be construed as it's worse here. It's not, it's actually better. But it still is it's something that if you were putting it in the cons column, it definitely is that. But let's talk about the pros. And the pros are this. And the biggest point, and what I said, there are 4 of these movies, any of these ones in this franchise, you know, all the way back to Godzilla and Kong Skull Island. What you want is the fights. The big cities being destroyed and people fighting, and people fighting, monsters fighting. That's what you're after. This movie definitely acknowledges that, and it just kind of goes, okay, we're going to give you fights all the time. Not just one at the end, or not just we're building up with the little testers early throughout the movie. This movie, it just goes, you want to see big dudes? You want to see Kong fighting Godzilla and fighting other things? You got it. You win. There's no problem. We'll do that for you. And you know, that's all this should be. And that's the mindless fun that we're there for. It brings. And that's why I found this enjoyable. No, I'm not going to go in 2 weeks' time. Oh my god, you have to see Godzilla versus... I keep saying Godzilla versus Kong. Godzilla X Kong. For some reason they decided to call it that because they're now mates. Or whatever. But it's going to be forgettable. Of course it is. But when it comes to talking about good, mindless monster movies, which, I mean, as a subgenre unto itself, this has got to be one of the better ones. And again, keeping Godzilla -1 out of the equation, this is probably the strongest of these. The only other one that I do think contests with it is Kong Skull Island. I think that's one of the more underrated mindless funs that there's been in the last while. And I know it was a good wee while back it was released. But that's probably the only one that I can think really pushes this. In this franchise, you know, everything from Godzilla and Kong, then you had, was it Godzilla King of the Monsters, and then there was Godzilla vs. Kong, and then now Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire. God, these names. Yeah, it's fun for what it is. And I think if you're taking children or you're going as a family to see a movie, I think this is going to have everything you'd want in that regard. You're not going to recommend this in 5 years' time to someone. You're not. But it's hard to deny the fun that there is here in Godzilla Kong. And it probably ends the franchise. I got that feeling, not to say that the way the story ends completely closes the book, but I do think there's a potential of this being the last of these, and if this is it, it's going out on a somewhat high. And to say that it took what it had in Godzilla vs. Kong and built on it, because I think of the other versus movie that I can think of in, I say recent times, it was a good wee while ago now, but Alien vs. Predator, for example. The first Alien vs. Predator is kind of meh, but Alien vs. Predator Requiem, the sequel, is pretty damn pants. It's not very good. So for them to, you know, that's the movie we're all waiting on now. Alien vs. Predator versus Godzilla vs. Kong. How would that fight go down? God only knows. Would I watch it? Yeah, I'd be there. But overall, I don't even know what. I'm going on a bit of a tangent now talking about other movies. But overall, Godzilla Kong, The New Empire is a fun time. And at its best, that's all you can ever really hope for. And this is probably the best it can be. Yes, there's probably a few things that could be changed, but I think if you focus too more in the human side of the human element that I've mentioned so many times now, in Godzilla -1, that works perfectly. Godzilla is a part of it, but not the whole story. Whereas this, Godzilla and Kong, they are by far the main characters. And it's so weird to say that, but Godzilla -1, the main character, is certainly not Godzilla. Godzilla is the antagonist. Godzilla is the thing that our characters that we care so much about have to engage with and fight. And there isn't a big Kong to fight them. It's the human side. Whereas for this, I think if they care too much about the humans in this, then it takes away from what we're really here to see in this mindless side of this. And it'd be interesting to see what movies come from this. What movies does this... Do they finish with this? And then do they start a new franchise? A new Godzilla franchise? A new Kong franchise? Because these movies are going to be made until the end of time. I mean, they've been such long-lasting. You think of how long ago the first Godzilla movie was, the first Kong movie was, King Kong it would have been at the time. You know, and even something like Peter Jackson's King Kong is so long ago now. Is that 20 years? Almost 20 years? Yeah, it's definitely almost 20 years. So, for that to be the case, and that one is also one that I enjoy a lot, there has been movies of these that I have found enjoyable, but there's been a lot that have been pretty stinky. And it's a very varied subgenre with some real goods. Things like Peter Jackson's King Kong and things like Godzilla -1 in particular are ones that stand out to me. But overall, you're really just here to see the big CGI creatures having a scuffle. And if they do that well, and they do that in a fun way that you're enjoying what's on screen. I mean, I was in the cinema and you've seen a lot of the younger ones around and they were properly loving it. Properly into this movie. And I mean, that's what it's about at the end of the day. It's like me going to something like Super Mario or Sonic and really critiquing that it doesn't have this really emotional and riveting story and emotional characters and brilliant dialogue, because that's not the target audience. And for something like this, while the target audience might be slightly older than the target audience for those films I mentioned, I definitely feel that it would connect. It's not a movie that you're gonna see at the Oscars, for example. You never would, until Godzilla -1 rolls around. But this is a different thing altogether, and just because it has the same central beast, just because it has the same central focus and similar characters and similar nature in some ways, they're very different films, and they nearly feel like very different genres actually. But overall, this movie's fun, and that's all you can ask for. And with all that being said, let's get to rating time. As you can see, IMDb is about what you would expect for a movie like this. If it had been badly received, that rating would have been certainly a good lot lower. You would have been in the 5s or maybe even the 4s if it really didn't connect. But it's clear that with it pushing closer to, between 6 and 7, closer to the 7 side of things, it's clear that it's doing what it should. Not fantastic, because it never can be, because of the nature of the movie it is, but the fun that it brings is enjoyable. And for that reason, when I talked about Godzilla vs. Kong, I found it enjoyable. I watched it at home, as I said, so I didn't get to see it in the cinema. And I always thought then, when they do make another one, I'm looking forward to seeing that in the cinema, because it'll be fun, the visuals will be certainly what we're there for, the feeling of being in a cinema and seeing a big blockbuster like this. It ticks the boxes for what the boxes, or it ticks the boxes it should for what it tries to achieve. For the box it goes for, it gets the tick. And for me, it's an improvement on the previous film. Again, that could be amplified because I wasn't at home watching this one. I actually got to see it in the cinema, so that probably adds to it. But with it being better than the last one I thought was a 7 out of 10. This one, I think a fair 7.5 out of 10. I don't think it would ever break the 8 barrier, but for 7.5, for a movie like this, a movie that in some ways you would nearly assume that I, or a lot of people that watch a lot of movies like these, you would kind of go, well, surely he's not going to love that. He'd probably just think it's alright. But it's hard to deny the fun, and I couldn't get away from that, and you can probably tell by the way I'm talking about it. I could easily try to nitpick this and try and be harsh and go, this wasn't this and this wasn't this. But if we start doing that for no reason, and especially a movie that when it sets its stall out to be something, and it is that, and as a franchise that's grown over time in strength for what they're doing, it's not an emotional story, but what it is fun. And when that's your target goal, as a filmmaker, as a studio effects artist, anything, everybody involved in this that wanted to make this a fun monster bash, they did it, and it is fun. In 2 weeks' time, if you said, "Did you see that Godzilla?" I'd go, "Oh yeah, I probably did. Yeah, oh yeah, I did." And yeah, and then if you said, "Right, what happened in it?" I'd go, "Well, I think Godzilla and Kong were in it, and I think they were fighting people, either themselves or each other, or other big monsters and stuff." It's not going to be memorable. And probably when it gets to the end of the year, when I'm looking back on movies, I go, oh yeah, I do remember enjoying that. And that's what this movie is. So yeah, Godzilla Kong the New Empire, 7.5 out of 10. A fun time, a fun family time, I would imagine. Not a movie for everyone, but people that enjoy that mindless fun. I think it ticks the box. And yeah, that's my thoughts on Godzilla X Kong. God, that name, so stupid. Godzilla X Kong the New Empire. Try saying that 3 times when you've had a few beveraginos. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me talking about yet another movie. There's been a lot of good movies so far this year. There's been some not so good movies this year so far. You could probably guess which is which and which falls into which category. If you want to follow me, you want to subscribe to this channel, you want to stick around, leave a like, let me know you enjoy this video. If you want to do any of that, I'd appreciate you so much. I'm also on TikTok. There's a good lot of videos on there. Some of the smaller reviews, movies that I don't talk about too much, maybe movies that I felt like talking a bit longer about, but movies that maybe only need a few minutes just to kind of summarize my feelings on it. That's all on TikTok. I'm also on Letterboxd if you want to follow me over there. And yeah, all in all, I really appreciate you for taking the time out of your day for listening to me talking about a movie. If you want to stick around, I'd appreciate you so much. And if you do, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye, guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love, everyone.